I hereby call to order the September 2023 meeting of the City of Prescott General Plan Committee. Board members present, please state present when I call your name. James McCarver.
Present.
Gary Warab.
Present.
Deb Thalassides.
Present.
Jim Huffman.
Present.
Ralph Hess.
Here, present.
Mary Fredrickson.
Present.
Andre Carmen.
Not present.
Terry Sapio.
Present.
And I, Ted Gambogi. Rod Moyer called his wife.
What do you want? Are you doing an open call?
Yeah,
Are
go
you
ahead.
talking about a certain agenda item, or
We'll wait.
is it on the open call? What are you going to speak on? Just general? Okay.
Rob Moyer called. His wife's just got out of hospital with a knee replacement, and Don Michaelman are out of town, so they're both excused. This is an open meeting and is being recorded by the city. The proceedings are being televised by representatives of the public media. The public, local cable, and/or radio stations may also be rebroadcast. The number of board members present is
8.
6, 8.
8.
Oh, yeah, 8. That's right.
So it will require a vote of 5 for a majority. All parties wishing to be heard, including committee members, are required to state their name prior to speaking in order to ensure proper recordation. Members of the public are required to state their name and address for the record so we may know who is speaking and be able to contact them at a later date. Staff members present are Tori Darson, George Worley, Tammy DeWitt, Jack Shapiro from the Police Department, Matt Killian from Public Works, and Kay Seidel. And Andre Carmen just showed up. And Eric Moore, Councilman Eric Moore, and the Honorable Mayor Phil Good.
So 9 and 5 still.
Oh, yeah, so now it's 9 and 5. So do we have any public comment?
Yes, the next is the open call to the public. The City of Prescott welcomes public engagement, and residents may comment on and address the committee on matters not included on the agenda during the call to the public. Please complete a speaker card and submit it to the city staff prior to the meeting being convened. Speakers are limited to 4 minutes, and the call to the public will be limited to 40 minutes in total. Citizens are limited to addressing the committee 4 times regarding the same topic. Members of the committee may not discuss items that are not specifically identified on the agenda, and therefore interaction will be limited to the following: responding to criticism, request to staff to investigate and report on the matter, or request that the matter be scheduled on a future agenda. So we have 2 comment cards. We have Fred Oswald.
Well, thank you. I'm in general concerned about sustainability and the fact that the city has not been operated in a sustainable fashion for a long time, and I would like that you give serious consideration to sustainability, not growing so fast, not overusing our water, not constructing the pipeline. These are things that concern me greatly. We want to protect this environment for our children and grandchildren. Thank you.
Excuse me, Fred, what did you say about a pipeline? You said growth, water, and something about a pipeline.
I would oppose the pipeline because it'll dry up the Verde River and it will encourage more growth, and we need less growth. Thank you.
Thank you. And next we have Tana Karen Tana. Yeah.
Yes. What's that? We got it. Thank you, Fred.
Let me just pull this up, excuse me. So, thank you.
Mr. Chair, just approve
Mr. Hess?
I would just like to have the individual who's going to speak identify herself, since I didn't quite understand exactly what your name is, and maybe spell it for the record.
It's Tana, T-A-N-A, Karen.
Okay, thanks.
Hi. Good morning, committee. Thank you. I am with the Gail Gardner Neighborhood Plan, and we are doing an update for the Gail Gardner Plan. It was originally submitted to the city in 2001 and adopted into the Prescott General Plan. We are now doing an update on that plan. We are near finalization, but aren't quite there. And as it was the original one was adopted into the city plan, we submit that the update also be adopted into the city plans. We are looking at such things as traffic flow and circulation, the impact of the PFD, the events there on the neighborhood, neighborhood well-being, safety, all of those types of things. So we're not quite finished in, excuse me, I just got this note as I walked into the door. Keeps on moving. So sorry. Okay. After going through that process, we'll bring it to council so that hopefully it can be, the resolution will be for it to be adopted into the 2005 master plan. We are considering, but we don't know where the other neighborhood plans entail, what plots they entail. But the original 2001 Gail Gardner plan included all the plots pretty well on the central west side, from Miller Valley on over west, excluding, of course, the fairgrounds and the commercial properties. So all the plats, all the HOAs west of there, Oregon, Gale, Idlewild, all the way out to the Butte, were included in that original one. We don't know if that's changed or not, so we'll have to look at that with Mr. Worley. But if so, we would like the plan to be appropriately renamed as the Central West Side Neighborhood Plan, because it involves, it includes all of us, and also the impact from the rodeo itself extends a good 2 miles out as far as noise and other things are concerned. And the So basically, we're looking to submit the plan as soon as possible and earlier than City, Mr. Mayor, gave us to submit the plan to you. So thank you very much for your consideration. We just wanted to let you know what was going on as far as that.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Jim McCarver, can I ask a question?
Sure.
What are the north-south boundaries of that? You gave east-west boundaries. What are the north-south boundaries?
Northbound
Iron
would be
Springs.
Iron Springs.
South?
Southbound would be Gurley Street,
Okay, thanks.
as far as I know. I only had a glance at the plats last night as I was, sending out emails and getting emails at like midnight. So
Mr. Chairman, one other question. Did you start to mention PFAS, the forever chemical?
I thought I heard PFD, but
Okay. What is that you were
Prescott
referring to?
Frontier Days.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah. Greg Mandarelli Rodeo, Prescott Frontier Days, Buckle Club. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
Ralph?
Actually, it's not a question. I'm Ralph Hess. I would like to have staff put something on a future agenda regarding what the relationship between the general plan will be to neighborhood plans.
We'll bring that with the land use unit because it's part of the land use unit, the land use section.
And I have one question for the first speaker. You mentioned sustainability and the rapid growth rate. Could you give us a figure of what you think an appropriate growth rate for Prescott is?
Well, some people have been talking about 1%, but that means you double in 36 years approximately. And are we prepared to double everything? Double roads, double police stations, double hospitals in 36 years. And I think our city is losing its friendliness as we get bigger, as it's more crowded. And so I would suggest it should be quite a bit less than 1%.
So your ideal number would be what?
Perhaps 0.5%, but too much growth is the philosophy of the cancer cell.
Thank you. Tana?
Oh, sorry. Actually, the growth rate from 2000 was about 33,700, and the growth rate now is 48,000. I think it's 49,000, which is a growth increase of 50%. 50%, 2001 to 2023. So we have a 50% increase, which means, by the way, that the traffic increase is doubled that because there's 2 households per person, and that's how roads defines it. And then there's 2 ingresses and egresses per person per roads. We did that. We had to do that with the Save the Dells, with ADAD in the Dells. So I know that information from the Dells because I presented it to City Council then.
Any further resident input?
No, we don't.
So that takes us to the approval of the June 28th, 2023 revised general plan committee meeting minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
I make that motion.
And a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next is approval of the July 26th, 2023 General Plan Committee meeting minutes. A motion to approve?
I so move.
Jim Huffman, seconded.
Second.
Terry Sapio. All those in
Discussion.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
I have 2 points on that June 26th that I would like clarification on. There were 2 questions raised to the gentleman who gave the presentation from the Water Resources Department. Let me just read them. Vice Chair Sapio asked if there were numbers available for how long the water would last, how much it is going down, how fast it's going down. He did not have an answer to that question. He said he would get back to you. Did you get any response from Mr. Ruiz? The second question was Member Warub asked what percentage of water released from Watsonville goes back to recharge. Again, Mr. Ruiz did not have the numbers or the percentages. He said he would check on it and get us some exact figures.
We'll remind him and get that.
I think those are important points.
Thank you, Jim.
So I think we need to amend that recommendation to approve.
The minutes are the minutes. So, sorry. Staff's supposed to be a good example. Yeah, the minutes are the minutes of what happened. So you asked for additional follow-up. The minutes stay the same. The follow-up is what has failed.
Okay.
So we'll contact him and get that follow-up
Okay.
and email it to you.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Jim McCarver stands opposed. And Ralph Hess abstained. Okay, we're into our first presentation.
Thank you. We have Jack Shapiro here from the Prescott Police Department. Sorry. Your presentation for you today.
Good afternoon. Again, like Tammy said, my name is Jack Shapiro. I'm a sergeant with the police department. Some time ago, Tammy asked me to assist with the general plan internal committee, and here we are. It's not working.
Down is up.
That's what I'm doing. I might have it upside down. I had it upside down. I had it upside down. So my plan is to go over the 2015 general plan, the goals, the strategies, and then discuss the challenges we've faced and some of the successes. So goal 1 in 2015 was to continue ongoing partnerships with various community stakeholders and to maintain the application of community policing principles. Goal 2 is to create an environment. Sure. Is this better? Okay. Goal 2 is to create an environment in the community of safety and security where citizens and visitors alike can feel comfortable going about their desired activities. So the strategies to accomplish those goals, strategy 1.1 was keep open communication going with various community groups by attending and participating in meetings and events that are not organized by the police department. That's one of our successes. We formed very strong working relationships with many community organizations. Just to name a few: Polera, Spectrum, Mental Health Resources, Dignity Health, Coalition for Compassion and Justice, the Humane Society, Kiwanis, various Block Watch organizations. The next strategy was maintain and support the Community Services Unit. This is our unit that's dedicated to carrying out crime prevention awareness and community efforts. These are the bicycle officers that you guys see out on the square and things like that. They do a lot of our site activities. They work with neighborhood watch groups, assist in problem-solving activities. They set up Shop with a Cop, usually at the end of the year, and go out and meet with all the kids that participate in Shop with a Cop. Maintaining the community services unit function has been a challenge for us. So the picture on the bottom of that screen was the community services unit a little over a year ago. Now it's been knocked down to 1 sergeant, 2 officers that are in the school. So now 2 school resource officers and 1 lead police officer. Lead police officer, so it's kind of other agencies may call it a corporal, so kind of in between officer and sergeant. So that's been a huge challenge for us, is keeping the community services section staffed due to current staffing. The other strategy in 2015 was to assist in creating greater awareness that crime and disorder are a community responsibility, and everyone has a part in preventing both. Community outreach to create greater awareness of community responsibility has been implemented, and we've done a good job through social media, news, and public events. So I put some stats up there. In 2022, we had 490 social media posts. We had 9 Pink Patch events in October. You'll be seeing that coming up again in October this year. We participated in 3 Coffee with a Cop events. We had hosted 2 Citizens Academies, and we had our 25th annual Shop with a Cop.
It's a Pink Patch event.
So in October, we wear pink patches. You can see in the photo on the PowerPoint presentation there that we have some cars wrapped in pink. We sell the pink patches, and the money goes to breast cancer research at the hospital, local hospital. It goes to the breast cancer center. Strategy 2.1 in 2015 was to use various patrol techniques: walking patrol, bicycle patrol, marked police vehicles, create a visible presence in the city of Prescott, especially in the areas of highest people concentration. So walking patrols and bicycle patrols were implemented alongside marked police vehicles. However, bicycle patrols and walking patrol details are currently difficult to staff. So our current staffing, and this was as of about a month ago. Current staffing, 73 officers. This is 6 in the academy. So 67 actually working the street, and we are allotted 84 officers.
Before you move off that, can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So the walking and the bicycle patrols, thank you. The walking and the bicycle patrols that you say staffing is difficult, is there a particular reason for that, or have the ones that were there just been moved off to other duties?
No, it's due to our shorter staffing. So we've moved a lot of our officers back into patrol. So many community services got moved back into patrol, and these details have become overtime details that are difficult to fill because we're also filling patrol shifts with overtime.
And I'm sorry, so is it that the patrols in cars are just have a higher priority than the walking and bicycle patrols?
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question. Do you know the percentage of women and minorities that make up the force?
Currently, we have, count in my head.
Sorry, it wasn't supposed to be a trick question.
I know. To whip out my toes. Now, currently, I have 4 female officers. And as far as minorities are concerned, I guess we'd have to have a definition of. I mean, we have officers from many different backgrounds.
Does that include chief?
Yes, that does include the chief. Any other questions on staffing before I move on? So the other strategy in 2015 was to assign police resources to provide the quickest possible professional response to a call for service in the community. So overall calls for service increased by 3% between 2021 and 2022. Our officer-initiated community policing increased by 9.5%. So those are calls that officers initiated themselves. They weren't calls that came into the dispatch center. These were on-view calls that officers initiated. And then I wanted to give you guys our average emergency response time, and this includes all what we'd consider emergencies, calls that are hot toned out for officers to respond to with lights and sirens. And that average response time in 2022 is 6 minutes and 9 seconds.
Fire department is quoting response times of something like 11 and a half minutes, and their goal is 5. Do you have a goal?
I could get back to you on a goal. I don't know of a goal. All right, and now I'll move into, so that was the goals and strategies from 2015. So I'm going to move into what the police department has developed in 2023 as their current strategic plan, to give you an idea of what direction we'd like to go. So goal number 1 is safe community. So we want to continue to provide a superior level of public safety service through data-informed response to crime and community needs with a focus on quality of life and crime reduction. So we're looking to analyze trends in criminal activity and community needs to ensure an effective police response. And we want to create and maintain recruiting and retention plans based on 3-year projection of future needs. That photo on the PowerPoint presentation there is one of our advertisements for recruiting. We have a plan to eventually have 8 officers on each squad, each patrol squad, and including the investigation section, the community services section, and possibly form our own section that would investigate people crime and drugs crimes. So we're looking at 6 squads with 8 officers and a sergeant on each squad would be our ideal patrol squad setup.
Ted?
I've got a question. On recruiting and staffing, you're understaffing right now. Would you say that the primary reason is funding? Is it recruiting? Is it retention? All of the above? What would you say is causing the understaffing?
It's all of the above. We lose people to the valley. We have a difficult time getting people to come here from other agencies because of the cost of living. And so retention can be difficult if people see how much they get paid in the valley compared to what we get paid in the cost of living in the valley.
I have a question to Gary Warub. So, out of curiosity, are you able to compare Prescott to a similar size population, how we compare with services and that? Is there any that would come to mind that might be familiar so we get an idea of where we need to go or where we are in relationship to others?
Yeah, and I don't know. I can't give you an informed response on that. I know when they've done our previous compensation studies, they use different cities in the state that I found odd, like they'd compare us to Kingman and things like that. But I don't have an informed response for you on that. So goal number 2 in our current strategic plan is organizational excellence. We want to be an industry leader through innovation and cooperative organizational leadership. Again, with that comes obtaining and maintaining appropriate levels of staffing to reduce crime and provide the highest level of public safety service in our region. We want to do this through training. If you want to have professional police officers, they have to be well trained. We want to have the best equipment. And one of the ways that we hope to retain people is to have a nice balance of quality of work life and work. So work-home life balance is what we'd like to achieve for our officers. And then I discussed training. That's a couple of our officers in the bottom photo who are getting qualified to be phlebotomists. Goal number 3 in the current strategic plan is communication internally and with external partners. So we want to continue our outreach programs, the success we've had with our current Citizen Academy, the Coffee with a Cop events, National Night Out with our block watch groups. And then we want to focus on our internal communication. Another way to try to increase retention, quarterly supervisor meetings to keep everyone up to date and transparent on internal issues, updates from the chief consistently, and consistent communication throughout the department. We also would like to have an online presence where we maintain the police department website, improve the ability for citizens to report online. The past 2 years have provided an annual report to the community through the website, and we'd like to start providing methods to provide feedback online.
Yeah, this may be heresy, Deb Thalassides, but given the national shortage of police candidates, police officers, what is the value of continuing to do things like Citizen Academy, Coffee with a Cop, where it's taking officers off the street instead of, being out on the street fighting crime? Because there's just, you got rid of the community unit, but that we're still doing other things. And I'm not saying I have an opinion about the value. I just would like to hear from you. Why would we keep doing those things?
Because I think it's important for us to interact with the community, and just like this committee, it's important for them to see what we do, and important for them to give us feedback on what we do. And I'll tell you, most of the people that participate in the Citizen Academy are supervisors like me that have it pre-scheduled in our calendar pretty early on in the year. So I was at the Citizen Academy last night. Goal number 4 on the current strategic plan is effective partnerships. So we want to continue and establish more mental health and wellness relationships to provide resources for both our citizens and our employees. Continue our law enforcement partnerships. We have a pretty good working relationship with the surrounding law enforcement agencies, the state, and with federal law enforcement agencies. That's a photograph from one of our DUI enforcement task forces, where you can see there's officers from Prescott, Prescott Valley, DPS, and the Sheriff's Office, I think, as well as Chino Valley. And then we want to continue our professional partnerships with Yavapai Regional Medical Center, places like adult probation, schools, local businesses. And then we get into infrastructure. So goal number 5 in our current strategic plan is to upgrade our facilities, infrastructure, and technology. So we're currently working on reorganization of the current police facility to facilitate growth, expand areas to house resources, and harden security features. So we're currently rebuilding our patrol briefing area, our report writing area, and we're changing some of our security features, just like you've seen here in the council chambers and the City Hall building. We'd like to update and harden security at the Prescott Regional Communications Center. I don't know if you're unaware, that also falls under the police department, the dispatch center. And then we'd like to do a full evaluation of our current record management system and computer-aided dispatch system, and look for enhancements in other systems to improve efficiencies in our work. You guys have any questions?
Do you need another facility?
Eventually, we will need another facility.
But that's not in the strategic plan right now.
Not currently.
So in the 10-year horizon that we're looking at, would that be something that this committee needs to think about?
Yes, it would be in consideration in the next 10 years or so.
Ted, Gary Worb. So 2 areas that I see, to me, are a major concern. One is funding, and the other is housing. We brought up affordable housing, workforce housing before. It should be a major concern. Is there, for both of those areas, what is the police department looking at for correcting those? Is there any potential for that in the near future?
I mean, there's been discussion of housing, just like the school district has taken on. You know, we've got some sign-on bonuses now. We've worked with HR and the city for increased pay. But I mean, I think a lot of it is the economy. And those are some of the best ideas that have come up is the housing. But you're looking at the younger officers that are going to take up that housing. And someone like me who's got a family and children aren't going to be interested in that.
One
On
question.
the subject of hiring new officers, you mentioned the price of housing as a challenge here in Prescott, and our resident Fred brought up the element of growth. Salaries, affordable housing is one answer, maybe, and pay raise or salary is another possible answer. When you're talking with HR, have you looked at any options of assisting in a down payment for a home? You know, like if you stay 10 years, the city waives a down payment. Or have you considered that at all?
So we had some people discuss that with me at the open house, the general plan open house, and it is a great idea. And I don't know that that's been explored with HR yet, but I will definitely bring it up.
Chair, Mary Frederickson, I didn't hear anything as you went through your presentation as to utilizing civilian staff within any particular units to offload some of the tasks that you guys need to do to non-uniformed, non-gun-bearing staffers. Do you undertake that?
We do. So we currently have a couple civilian traffic investigators who can investigate traffic crashes, and we're in the process of hiring another civilian traffic investigator.
Mr. Chairman, also, we have citizens on patrol, which help a great deal with traffic control and things like that at incidents. Also, I had a question about the new center down on Sundog. I'll call it the jail for how does that affect you guys? Is it beneficial to you in any way?
It will be eventually. It's still it's at the same capacity as the previous Prescott jail, where they don't have medical staffing, and if someone has medical issues, we have to transport them to the Verde.
On the national news, we hear about the border and fentanyl coming across the border. In state news, you hear about a bust on I-17 or I-40. Do we have a problem with fentanyl in Prescott?
I'd say it's a problem everywhere, but yeah, we the majority of our drug arrests are fentanyl.
Ralph Hess. I'd like to follow up on Deb Thalassides' question. You'd indicated that, yes, you would believe that there needs to be an additional facility within the next 10 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'd say based on the population growth to the north, we're probably going to need at least a substation up north.
Okay, you'll need a substation up north. All right, and could you please go back to goal number 4 on your presentation? Regarding the mental health and wellness element of that goal, I'm aware that the Prescott Police Department is part of the Yavapai County Mental Health Coalition. And so, are you familiar with that program?
No, not too much.
Okay. Then I don't have a question.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Any other questions? Thank you very much.
Eric Moore.
Eric Moore has a question.
Just with the shortfall of 17 staff currently, as part of the strategic plan include a strategy for attracting, we're at 17 short now, and as we grow, that's going to be compounded. Do we have more specific strategy for recruiting and retaining? I know you mentioned money and things like that, but I think we maybe need more specifics than just generalities.
So as far as recruiting, we're holding recruiting events much more frequently than we had been. Currently, we've been doing it every month. We've been holding recruiting events. We just held a recruiting event this past weekend, and I think we had about 4 good candidates come through. But increasing our recruiting events, we're advertising more. If you see the back of our patrol vehicles, we've got a QR code you can scan that says we're hiring, that takes you straight to the recruiting website. We're putting ads throughout the country. We've got ads in California and LA to try to attract the Los Angeles police officers that are trying to get out of LAPD. But it's increased recruiting efforts. Letting people know what we offer here in Prescott, and just trying to get the message out that it's a good place to work.
Any other comments? Jack, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Huh? No, that's it. Thank you. Next, we have Matt from Public Works to discuss, go over Department Environmental Division regarding water quality and green infrastructure.
All right. Testing, testing. Good afternoon, committee. My name is Matt Clean. I'm out of Public Works Department, the environmental coordinator there. And the control down is up.
Is there a way for you to get closer?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks. No? All right. So let's go. So I'll be reviewing portions of the environmental planning element 9.0. And as we can see here, it's a fairly all-encompassing element if you to give each one of it their requisite attention. My role has largely been with items 9.1 through 9.3. So that's what I'll be addressing today, as well as some of the green stormwater infrastructure strategies that apply to a number of those elements there, 9.2 and 9.3 in particular. So the guidance that we get from state statute suggests that the plan elements of air quality, water quality, and natural resources are considered. And what's interesting about the 2015 general plan that we're reviewing today is folks at that point in time thought that natural resources merited being broken out into consider our lakes, given that the asset that they are. And so that will be demonstrable later on with the amount of attention relative to the lakes compared to, say, what we have with water quality. So as we go through, I've tried to break it down in a fairly straightforward process where we look at these things in a kind of traffic light, subjective evaluation of, no, we didn't do it. We did some of it as a partial, that orange tone, and then green is, yep, we did it, or we did most of it. And then after that, we'll go through and just have some kind of bullet points. Mostly, I'm not here to suggest that we have very specific language in place yet. That's really your collective and the community's collective will to put that language together. But some of the things that I've seen and my colleagues have seen during the course of our tenure here relative to these topics that may merit consideration in your future discussions. So with that, very timely topic as well, air quality, otherwise known as a breeze through the trees. And it was particularly interesting to look at some of these air quality parameters with recent developments. And so there's actually some decent monitoring data provided thanks to the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. They have a temporary monitoring station that is set out off of Commerce Street by the Yavapai County Health Department. And that station does have both ozone and particulate 2.5 continually monitoring going on. Previously, the Department of Environmental Quality had a more established particulate matter meter in Prescott Valley, but it basically was below the threshold under the Clean Air Act to require continual monitoring. So they do this to largely keep the public informed for public health issues associated with wildfires and similar instances. And if we look at some of the data, the two parameters that we're looking at are ozone. I was able to go back and pull the data up through the effective date roughly of the current 2015 general plan. And from an ozone perspective, you can see that's pretty overwhelming evidence that we're in good air quality. Prevailing winds coming through a whole lot of the Prescott National Forest get relatively cleaned before they drop down on us. We're not in a valley bottom per se, so that pollution doesn't stay down on us, kind of like we see in the morning with those cold air inversions, but it does have some place to go going out toward Prescott Valley and the kind of Granite Creek watershed to the west and north, or pardon me, to the east and north. Similarly, our particulate matter, I pulled this up from the beginning of the month, but at that point in time, our running 2-hour average, or excuse me, the 24-hour average is 2 micrograms per square meter. That's about as good as it gets anywhere in the state, frankly. And if you look at it over the same lifespan of the current general plan, 2015 to the present, our average is at 6. I know this print is in micro font, but the 24-hour rating is 0 to 12, and so we're less have half of that within that best possible range. And just so you know that most of these data sources are hyperlinked in the PDF, so staff can provide that to you so you can see where those air quality monitoring stations are and some other references as well. This is data that I took this week. So I believe it's on the 25th, and it shows when that middle of the peak is right about middle of the day when the prescribed fire activity kind of reached its peak, and we didn't have winds in our favor so much. Typically, when they do these fires, they have very extensive weather forecasts and look at smoke sheds as well as prevailing winds. And even though it was heavy on us this morning, it quickly moved out as the prevailing winds of the warming days showed up. And so here, we were still at our 24 hours of 2 grams. I looked at it, or 2 micrograms per meter squared. I looked at it this morning, and we did bump up. We were still in the smaller time frame in the good category, and our 24-hour average bumped up to 3. So that's even with the prescribed fire activity we were having here. We're still in relatively good from the particulate component air quality perspective.
Quick question, Jim McCarver. These numbers are from that station in Pioneer Park?
Yeah, so on Commerce Drive, exactly. And so that is a little bit further down from where we experienced it most heavily this morning, just looking out or as I came into work today. So the goals here, to encourage, maintain Prescott's existing good air quality by protecting it from degradation. First strategy is to encourage EPA-approved wood-burning stoves and fireplaces, continue the current program of paving unpaved roads within the city, and maintain road sweeping. In the document, it actually references water-filled so that there are some dust suppression activities associated with that road sweeping. The second goal is to promote alternative transportation strategies in order to reduce vehicle emissions. So now if we look at under our kind of evaluation perspective, that first strategy of encouraging the EPA approved wood burning stoves and fireplaces within the city, our chief building office official didn't know of that. So what the city does approve are UL listed. UL listings for devices found within the home or commercial settings are more of a safety setting than they are an emissions setting. So this is something that you could say kind of was met partway because generally most of those UL listed ones are more efficiently burning so as not to produce dangers associated with heat and whatnot. The strategy of continue the program of paving unpaved roads, that has continued, and many of you may be familiar with the most recent manifestation of that in the paving of alleyways so that our service trucks, garbage trucks in particular, are able to get back there without creating significant issues to the roadway or to drainage associated with it. And road sweeping, particularly in the last couple of months, has seen a notable uptick as the streets department have identified equipment that is on the road more than it's in the shop. Even though some of the more efficient machines are better at picking up more of those particulate matter, if they're always in the shop, they're not going to be getting as much dirt off the road or preventing it from escaping into the air. So those are things that we have seen some improvements in. And we have a question.
This is Andre Carmen. For the road sweeping, where does the water come from?
Those are from the city's potable water source.
Could it be done with cleaned up wastewater?
Potentially, yeah. We also have to evaluate those kind of water sources in terms of what is still left in them relative to stormwater pollution. And so if there are traces of nutrients in there, we've got an impaired lake for nutrients. And so we don't necessarily want to coat the roads that are going to be washed down into the lake with something that may have a slightly higher nitrogen or phosphorus profile.
Thank you.
So for the second goal, the alternative transportation strategies, I'm not going to touch it because Ian Mattingly will next month during the circulation. And I spoke with him last week, and he indicated that his team and the Pedestrian Bike Traffic Advisory Committee are looking at all issues, not just within the circulation element, but anything that kind of touches that alternative transportation. So while I mentioned some opportunities here, most of that is going to be more fully discussed and considered under Ian's guidance. So challenges. One of the biggest challenges that we face here is that as we look at air quality, we don't have primacy in it, and it's not ours to regulate. It's regulated by the state. EPA regulates has delegated that primacy to the state, and we, quite frankly, just don't merit all that much attention given the air quality that we generally experience here. The other thing is the areas that in my role I've received the most complaints are associated with restaurants from an air quality perspective. I was able to contact folks out of the Phoenix area who have a number of much more significant regulations pertaining to air quality for ozone, for particulates at both sizes. And the challenge with that is that under the Clean Air Act, almost all smoke that comes from the production of food, cooking fires, is exempt from the Clean Air Act. So even DEQ in the Maricopa area, non-attainment areas from an air quality perspective, are not able to go out and talk with some of those more smoky food establishments. What they do in those cases are work with the entities about employing the best management practices possible, using cleaner fuels, extending smokestacks so that the local residents are not impacted to as great a degree. One of the other things, and as I mentioned, it's hyperlinked here, when we think of air pollution, a lot of different things come to mind: smoke, vehicle emissions. But things like commercial gas leaf blowers are notoriously bad for emissions, and there's just not.
Excuse me, would you repeat that?
Yeah, so commercial gas blowers, landscape ones, that hyperlink will take you to a Motor Insider Edmunds.com report where their laboratory tested the emissions from commercial gas leaf blowers and found that they were more heavily polluting than a 3,000-mile drive in a Ford Raptor truck. Half hour of a two-stroke and a little bit longer and a four-stroke. And so that is something that I think we have all seen en masse as we go about the city in our morning as residences and commercial properties are cleaned up. So that could be an area of opportunity potentially. And as all these challenges and opportunities are noted, there's a lot of question marks up here because that's where you guys come in and can start chewing on these things and looking for areas of both the challenges and opportunities. Opportunities, and much more of this is really going to tie into Ian's presentations: electric vehicles, electric bikes, charging stations. If we think about it, what we're experiencing today, with the Forest Service being proactive and doing prescribed burns to have a healthy forest, are presenting the catastrophic wildfires that would have significant health impacts for much of our community. So supporting the Forest Service and having this proactive approach to healthy forest management is definitely worthwhile. Similarly, within our city, reducing our fire risk for those catastrophic fires to come within city limits through FireWise and Fire Adapted Community is something that is definitely merits consideration. On the to mirror kind of the 2015 comment about wood stoves, pellet stoves actually have some potential application here. They're particularly clean burning relative to a traditional wood burning fireplace, and they also help create markets for forest thinning for those smaller timbers that you would find in the northern Arizona area in particular. So the Forest Initiative out of the Flagstaff area, 4 national forests have worked together to try try to establish commercial markets for smaller diameter timbers that don't have the commercial lumber application that you typically would see. And while they've looked at things like particle board factories and other stuff, pellet stoves, the production of pellet wood is one of the things that is a potential solution, or one of many potential solutions. So from a short and long-term goal perspective, thinking about things like just making sure we're in good and regular communication with the Department of Environmental Quality to encourage them to maintain that existing station. They're largely doing it from a volunteer perspective and to kind of keep their thumb on the pulse of what's going on over here. But they've also been very receptive to any time I've reached out to them with regards to questions about, the restrictions on food facilities or just general ability for a community to establish their own air quality guidelines. So with that, I will bump out of air quality and start looking at water quality. As I note here, it's both above and below. What we have in this goal is a commingling of two different water supplies. And this is the extent of what water quality is listed in the 2015 plan. And with recent realities of emerging contaminants, not only within our community, but across the region, it kind of is a testament to perhaps the need for this area to be strengthened or augmented somehow.
Matt, Gary Warb, is this the appropriate time for you to interject the grant you just received?
That'll be coming up shortly, so hold that thought. So our first strategy was to strengthen requirements for building sites with steep grades to prevent erosion and pollution from stormwater runoff. That would apply to just about anything south of Watson and Willow Lakes. We've got a fair amount of topography here. And then the second one was evaluate industrial discharges that have potential to pollute the Little Chino aquifer, other aquifers, or surface waters. So how are we doing here? Oh, I keep hitting the laser. So, did we strengthen the requirements? Kind of. In 2016, the city's general engineering standards went through, and those do have, in addition to Prescott City Code that was passed in 2007 and effective in 2008, a number of requirements for construction. The fact that we have limited it to building sites with steep grades, it should be applicable to all, in my perspective. We want to make sure that every construction site keeps their stuff on their site. We don't want to see the sediment moving into the city's infrastructure. It puts public safety issues at play. It increases costs to the streets department to maintain. And it has negative impacts on every surface water it touches downstream from that point on. So having it limited to building sites with steep grades, I don't think that's quite a necessary qualifier. And it may actually be more of a reflection of the time at which this was considered. We're coming off the 2009 kind of housing crash. And so we may have been a little bit more receptive to creating an environment for that to rebound. I'm a little bit of hindsight guessing here. And then the second one is evaluate the industrial discharges. So if you look at what we have in terms of discharges, we're qualifying it so we're eliminating ourselves from considering other sources of pollutants. If we use PFAS as an example, industrial sources are not the prime ones for it. Those are commercial sites. And so commercial sites and residential sites. It's coming off of every Gore-Tex parka that we have, every nonstick Teflon skillet that we have, any number of fire retardant issues or applications is coming from our entire community. And so anytime we start to qualify it down, there may be reasonable application, as is the case with our wastewater collections pretreatment program that looks to make sure that industrial outfits do not provide surcharges of specific pollutants to our water treatment facilities. Those are federally mandated programs that we do have in place. which is important. But limiting ourselves to strictly industrial discharges, for another example, doesn't accurately reflect our surface water quality requirements that was established and adopted by Arizona Department of Environmental Quality and the Environmental Protection Agency that talks about the commercial and residential downtown areas being our pollutant hotspot. So all of a sudden, we're already kind of at odds with other well-established and vetted documents that are identifying pollutants in our community. So making sure that we have alignment between what we're asking for and what has been done by data acquisition, analysis, and community participation is worthwhile.
Ralph Hess. So how would you modify or add to strategy 1.2 to address those shortcomings?
Good question. There's a lot of stuff we could look at from a surface water perspective, from a commercial perspective, and I actually mentioned it in an upcoming slide as just one of the potential short or long-term goals. And so if you'll bear with me for just a second, I'll give an example of one of the ways we could do that.
All right, thank you.
I'm not doing that. All right. To speak to your point, looking at short and long-term goals, city code currently requires that all new commercial and subdivision developments have a first flush treatment. So we evaluate that by it's the ½ inch of water across all the newly impervious area. Rooftops, parking lots, sidewalks, all of that stuff. All of that has to be treated before it enters either a natural water course or the city's storm drain system. Our community has established that amount at a ½ inch, but many of the other cities with fewer impaired waters than we have established it at 1 inch. And so that is one of those methods that we could do to increase our ability to treat water on the site where the pollutants are being generated before it hits either city infrastructure or natural infrastructure.
Could you explain the ½ inch?
Yeah. So if we were to look at an open and native lot, a 1 acre lot, for example, as we look at it from a stormwater perspective in two different ways. One is the stormwater quantity. So what we don't want to do is have negative impacts to city infrastructure or downstream residents. And so we look at the volume of water that is being created by concreting, roofing, or whatnot over. So that volume is usually kept in a detention basin or underground chambers or something of that nature. And so many of the sites, commercial sites around town, you'll see that. And sometimes it's as subtle as a little rain garden because what they had before wasn't all, completely native. It had some level of development previously. On the stormwater treatment front, we're looking at that change from a native background to a hardscape. So the ½ inch of water across that entire is the volume that has to be treated. And there's different methods of doing that through our general engineering standards. And so you can actively filter it or put it through mechanical separators, or you can put it into a basin and just have that volume captured below the outlet of that basin. So it percolates, feeds the plants, does that sort of thing. So the challenges associated with this are the commingling of surface and wastewater streams and responsibilities. And so one of the things that can be challenging at times is that when we look at the organization of some of these elements, we know that they're prescribed by Arizona revised statutes, but they don't necessarily mimic our organizational structure. And so if we're looking at the industrial discharges, that does fall under public works, but it has nothing to do with me as the environmental coordinator. So there's a kind of a little bit of a disconnect there. And so figuring out ways where we can chunk these off and have them land on the appropriate staff so that we can realize these a decade from now would be the goal. As I mentioned, the areas of pollutants that were mentioned previously, they don't align with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality total maximum daily load documents. So those are documents that are established after they identify impaired or polluted waters. The department comes through and says, we're going to do a modeling exercise for all the pollutants that impact, that are within the watershed of that surface water, that creek or that lake. And then they essentially assign every jurisdiction a chunk of pollution to get rid of. Because we are the largest jurisdiction for all of the creeks in town that are impaired for E. coli, and for Watson Lake that's impaired for nitrogen, phosphorus, and the resultant issues, we have the largest burden to bear with pollution reduction. And those documents don't align with what this 2015 general plan. And in fairness, this general plan came out just before those documents came into being. They were being considered at that time by the Department of Environmental Quality, but had not yet been finalized. Also, some of the specificity, as I mentioned, don't let us fully consider some of the emerging contaminants. If we're overly focused on any one source, whether it's an industrial from like a more of a zoning perspective, zoning industrial versus commercial versus residential, we may not pick up on where some of these other pollutants are coming from. And as the TMDL documents meant, commercial loads, pollutant loads may be actually greater than, and this is also true of PFAS, the commercial pollutant loads may be greater than the industrial ones that we point to in the 2015. So opportunities include one water approaches. Tucson has done this recently, and they took it to the public for a vote on it. And what one water approaches do is it values every form of water as kind of an integrated resource to look at. So stormwater, which is my wheelhouse, what created my position back in 2012 that I found in 2016, that one was mostly thought of as a nuisance, but now we recognize that in an arid land, any bit of precipitation we get is a resource that should be embraced and put to work for us. So with that, you can also think about things like green stormwater infrastructure as a way of reducing pollutants.
Go back to one water approach, and you're talking about stormwater. What are we doing about stormwater?
Where to begin? So we're regulated by the state through a MS4 program, Municipal Separate Storm Sewer System Permit, and that has a number of activities that are required for it. I just submitted the annual report for it about 3 weeks ago, and it has a whole list of obligations from public outreach to public involvement, identifying and investigating reports of pollution, dealing with construction sites, having those first flush treatment devices on all new development, all of those things come into play.
Matt, can I follow up on Ted's? For an example, let's say a new parking lot or existing parking lot at a mall or a plaza where it's paved and they have raised beds, which they water using city water. What is the mediation for that? Because you have numerous vehicles parked there and pollution and all of that.
Let's use a more immediate example of the parking lot we all utilized earlier today. And so in the corner of that lot, there's a storm drain filter. So the outreach component on it says only rain down the drain. Everything that we put in there is going to end up in Granite Creek. There's an inlet filter there so that the hydrocarbons that drip off of our vehicles don't end up in our creek. Now, if we look at the green stormwater infrastructure perspective, we would put curb cuts in those parking lot islands so that those trees are watered through runoff. There's less of a charge of that stuff down into the creek. And also the nutrients that come running off these surfaces are actually fertilizing those trees as they water them. So that's kind of the green stormwater infrastructure approach. Other opportunities include scaling up some of the components of our water conservation rebate update program. Rainwater harvesting has been in it for a number of years, and my colleague Kay has done a great job stewarding that program. But is it something that is worthy of consideration? Do we scale that up so that we can better apply it in larger settings for greater benefit? There's other things we can do, like require that all city projects have some component of green stormwater infrastructure. That's a potential way of addressing it as well.
I have a question. Deb Thalassides. Prescott Valley just completed, or they're in process, a comprehensive stormwater drainage recapture study. Would that be something of value? And again, we're looking at a 10-year horizon. Is that something that Prescott should consider in this plan?
Yes, and to that point, we just secured Arizona Department of Environmental Quality grant for green stormwater infrastructure evaluation. So what that grant is doing is actually bringing a consultant on board to help us do with stakeholder involvement, community outreach, all these things, evaluate these sites through town so that we can prioritize their value to the community and to water quality. That consultant is the same one that Prescott Valley is using for that study. The lead person there wrote the green stormwater infrastructure manual for Pima County as well. And so we wanted to make sure that we continue to work in step with our neighbors as well. They'll be involved in that outreach component. And we have considered stormwater for recharge. The reality is that everything above Watson Lake is a little bit of dirt on a lot of rock. And so our ability to actively recharge there is somewhat limited. And so looking at soils, geology, those kind of considerations really shifts our focus much more to the north, where a lot of new development is going in. So when we look at new subdivisions or housing communities out there, rather than having them put detention in places where it doesn't percolate because it's elevated and away from the stream channel, can we get that down into the creek where it benefits our airport recovery wells? And so those are the type of considerations that are at play and that we discuss internally on a regular basis. Having things like that in a general plan to give us additional direction would definitely be welcomed.
Sir, can you go back one chart, please?
Maybe.
Did you describe phyto remediation?
Yeah, so it turns out that in addition to just eating the nutrients, the nitrogen and phosphorus that runs off throughout a community, is some of its phosphorus is atmospherically just deposited as well. So that's great plant food in itself. There are studies that are going on that are looking at certain plants as their ability to basically break down some of these emerging contaminants. Scouring rush is one that they've looked at with regards to PFAS in particular. That one is a plant that dates back to the Jurassic era. It uptakes silica so that the herbivores don't chew it down. So it persists in places like Prescott, where we've got a lot of herbivores, whether it's javelina, cottontails, or the deer coming through and chowing stuff down. So can we find an appropriate place to see those kind of vegetations prescribed to deal with those kind of water quality issues? So moving on to lakes, I will come back to green stormwater infrastructure because it's a favorite one. How am I doing on time? Okay. So lakes, this is how many of us love to think about our lakes. Some of these are personal photos, and I'm a regular paddler and lounger out there. Love them. They're an incredible community asset. But there's a lot of times that's not what we see when we go out there. Those photos are from Monday. So when we think about other far-reaching implications for the quality of our lakes with regards to ecotourism or other things, this is a limiting factor as it currently stands. And we are working actively to address it. But in 2015, this is what the conventional thought process was as dictated by the general plan. Protect the lakes from sources of pollution, implement solutions using natural processes to reduce pollution, provide community education, maintain and preserve open space areas, develop recreational trails and park settings to promote low impact uses. And I think that objectively you can go through and say that we've done most of this stuff, but yet we haven't addressed some of these underlying water quality issues. That first one is really before we knew what green stormwater infrastructure was, they were pointing at it. And so there's a number of different ways we can address that, and I'll have some examples coming up to just supplement the discussion we've already had. Community education, that my role and requirement through the ADEQ obligations the city has under its MS4 program. We do this on a regular basis, and so we look everything from, you know, the fourth grade or fifth grade field trip to the airport water reclamation facility. We have something out there about stormwater and about how that impacts the lakes. Maintain and preserve open space areas. We've seen, you know, leadership and rec services in particular really create some expansive potential out there to help protect the watershed of our lakes. And the recreational trails and park settings. I'm a regular trail user, and I'm really impressed by the construction and quality that they have deployed out there as it limits erosion and negative impacts to our water bodies. So talking about that green stormwater infrastructure, we do apply it in places. One of our pollutant hotspots in town is the rodeo grounds. There's a lot of livestock. There's a dirt lot, plenty of horses as well, a lot of dog walkers, and all of that dumps into Miller Creek. And so this was an ADEQ funded project shortly after the inception of the 2015 general plan. And the goal of this one and most is to slow the stormwater, spread it out, and let it sink in. And that's what this one does. And we do active water quality monitoring. These kind of features can reduce pollutant loads in the runoff stream by 50%, as was documented here. At the rodeo grounds, at Taco Basin, at the adult center, Rollie P. Simmons Adult Center. And it also, as I mentioned before, addresses some of those pollutant issues, and it can address pollutant loads. And to that point, other communities have really embraced this, and it's a way that other communities are reducing potable water use for irrigation of common landscaped areas. It also is a great way to improve the aesthetics of neighborhoods and communities. And in Phoenix and Tucson in particular, it is a huge asset towards reducing heat island effects. If you do this on the right side of your billing, you can reduce your energy bill in a significant manner.
Matt, Gary Worb. So one of the things I'd like to come back to is the simplicity of using nature. You mentioned curb cutting, which I had brought up a year ago. Brad Lancaster, the guru of Tucson and water harvesting and that. Would you also talk about simplicity in rock dams as a green infrastructure?
Yeah, so rock dams are another kind of a permaculture almost based idea that's been in place for eons. And Southern Arizona in particular, they've utilized it to reverse the process of erosion. And in doing so, it also increases the amount of infiltration. So we're talking about that recharge issue again here. So we're creating a living sponge that allows that water to soak in. It also turns out to be a pretty good carbon sink, and a friend and a scientist down in Southern Arizona, Dr. Laura Norman, has done some really cool studies on kind of the carbon sink benefits of it, and also the benefits to the increase in the presence of water, not only from aerial extent, but also from a time scale. The permanence of water increases as you increase the number of these features in a watershed. And there's some great controlled studies on that in Southern Arizona.
Can you tell us what a carbon sink is?
Yeah, so it's a living sponge. And so we are creating a place where carbon, rather than being released into the atmosphere, is sinking into the ground and feeding the plants and soaking in with the water into the site, rather than being dispersed down further stream and just not being bioutilized.
Again, I like to talk about models, and you're extremely familiar with Cuenca Los Ojos. For those of you who know that the Chiricahuas, the family that Matt knows, purchased 121,000 acres years ago. They put in 20,000 rock dams. that area was decimated by copper mining, logging, cattle raising, and now fish are swimming in the streams again. And we got a green infrastructure regrowing. And that's extremely wonderful model for Prescott. And thanks for Matt for being friends with them as well.
So just getting to that upper right corner, there's a lot of folks that have really put in a lot of work on this. We're not recreating the wheel. What we're trying to do is make sure that it's an adaptable fit for our community. Some of those soils and bedrock issues complicate things. Our freeze-thaw cycles complicate things. We don't have a year-round growth cycle that can absorb all that water when it comes to a snow event or something like that. So we need to be smart about how we do it, but we have seen glimpses of success here, like the Acker Detention Basin, which is pictured in that upper left picture. That, in addition to pulling a number of people out of the FEMA flood zones, also serves as a sediment sink, and so that is turned into a wetland at this point in time. We see ducks there, we see mountain lion scat, deer on a regular basis, javelina, they're all there. We're seeing a wetland community kind of reemerge in this setting, similar to what's just over the hill in the Penn Eastwood newly constructed basin. We've got great opportunities to turn that into a wetland and a community resource. And so these are some of the things that we can consider going forward. So there's good guidance out there. The grant that I'm doing will help prioritize what sites we have so that they're shovel ready. And so that way we can incorporate them into capital improvement projects, or we can look at something outside and say, hey, that's something we can roll up our sleeves and do ourselves. Or we can find other funding mechanisms as well. It's pretty well funded at this point from a federal level. So back to the lakes after our green stormwater little detour. So the second goal, so as we remember with water quality, we had one goal and two strategies. We've got about 4 to 5 times as much for the lakes. And so figuring out what an appropriate level of balance there, I think, is something that also might be worthwhile. Some of the goals included up-to-date lake management plans for Watson and Willow Lakes. The strategies include ways to balance human uses with flora and fauna at man-made reservoirs, explore upstream improvements such as catch basins and filtration, and then implement measures supporting achievement of prescribed Federal Clean Water Act. So essentially that tells me that they kind of knew that we were having those TMDL documents, Clean Water Act requirements coming down the pike, and that was how they kind of addressed it, not knowing the full details of it at that time. So how are we doing? We do have a Watson Lake Management Plan. That was done to evaluate the water quality issues that we're currently dealing with. We'll be updating council on that in the near future. We are starting to see measures put in place. It's going to take a little while, and it's going to need additional emphasis. That first strategy, everyone that I've asked for their interpretation on it have provided a different answer. And to me, it's just a reminder that having the so-called SMART goals, even in a setting as broad as this, is very useful for staff to be able to take on some portion of it and say, yes, we're doing what was identified in this general plan, and here how we know when we got there. Explore upstream improvements such as catch basins for filtration. Again, this is really, we've done it a little bit, and we've kind of taken some lumps in doing so. A number of you may remember the Alarcon Street project. It was designed with the best of intentions and the poorest of realities. And as a result, we suffered from it. And green stormwater infrastructure honestly got set back about 4 or 5 years because of that project. We're coming around now, and we see it succeeding in other places, and it remains an opportunity going forward for a number of different benefits. And then the final one, we're kind of meeting the TMDL requirements, the Clean Water Act requirements. That kind of leads us to an opportunity. TMDLs are supposed to be remodeled every 5 years, so they rejigger the numbers and say, hey, is this an appropriate level of responsibility for the city of Prescott or the county or for anyone else? So we'll have opportunity to participate in that and better understand it. It's actually kind of a weak document as it currently stands. It doesn't have teeth in it. They've never really acted upon it. And that's allowed us to focus on some other things that get us towards those water quality improvements. But I would anticipate the next version of it having better teeth. So participating in it's going to be important.
Matt, TMDL, please.
That's the total maximum daily load document. So that's that Clean Water Act document that prescribes what we need to do with pollutants.
Matt, could you talk about the aquifer protection fee and how it relates?
Not really. I don't have all that much direct connection with it. And so that potentially could be put in one of the challenges, understanding where we can apply that, the nature of its status.
Matt, Terry Sapio. The short and long-term goals have all lakes swimmable by a certain date. What lakes are not swimmable right now in the Prescott?
Swimming's prohibited in all of our lakes.
Is that for health reasons? The water?
Seasonally, that would be true. So right now, those pictures were from Watson Lake on Monday morning. So people should not be swimming in that.
And where did that come from? Was that just runoff from the streets, or what caused that?
So I get to this a little bit in the challenges. We have a backlog of waste loads. So when these were created, it was for irrigation purposes in Chino Valley Irrigation District. The fact that it was rich in nutrients was great for them, right? It's going to help everything grow out there. We don't have to put additional fertilizers on. It's saving us money. The other thing that was helpful in that time towards water quality protections is that it got drained down. June, early July, it was drained down. So you didn't see the negative feedback cycles that nutrient cycling can have. And that's what we are experiencing now. And so since we stopped draining down completely, there's other surface water rights that I'm not fully fluent in, but we use it. Part of the reason it was purchased was for the recreation use as well as the recharge use. So we maintain a recreational pool, typically 7 feet below the spillway. So that basically turns into a warm bathtub at certain times of year. And spring runoff and monsoon runoffs dose it with additional pollution from the upper watershed. So we're getting that thrown in on top of a nutrient load that's already been there. It's just lurking down in that sediment. And so we have to address both of those pollutant sources, the one that's in the lake, planted there, and then the one that's coming down every time we get a runoff event.
So it's the nutrient runoff from the farmland that comes into the lakes that make them unswimmable?
So there are a number of different sources of nutrients, and they include everything from septic systems that are in the headwaters of every creek that we have. So you think about Mountain Club, the top of Aspen Creek, Butte Creek, Miller Creek, all these are impaired for E. coli. They also have large unsewered areas associated with them. So while those septic systems can adequately treat things like E. coli and prevent them from leaving site, fundamentally you have a nutrient load that's being deposited in the area and will eventually work its way downstream.
We have septic systems that flow into the lakes, or into the creeks?
Not directly. So you're not going to see a continuous flow, but there's a nutrient load that exists in the soil surrounding leach fields that can move itself down into creeks and then also into lakes.
I need to interject here because no one else in the room besides Matt has as much experience with these lakes as myself and testing and sampling with ADQ and lots of others. Historically, the stream beds have been overflowed with city sewer, exploding through their manholes and when we have our monsoons and that. So, and letting go of the sewage from sewage treatment plants. Now, those have been improved. I brought up before the aquifer protection fee. I'm the one who spearheaded that. That's about $2 million now. And it is predominantly for the lakes and the aquifer. The lakes were purchased in 1998. The two reasons were water storage and recreation. The highest requirement that the public voted for was swimming. There's 25 years of none of that. We threw up our hands years ago when former city council said, well, let's just hire more consultants. I'm so proud that Matt and Public Works and the city are stepping forward. The grant will make a huge difference in the future lakes. I am hoping that in my lifetime I'll see more public usage. They are fixable. I can cite examples from all over the world, much worse situations that have been mediated and remediated through natural resources. So, but it's not just septic. We live in a bowl. It all flows towards Watson Willow Lake. And I brought up rock dams and other ways to mediate it. And thanks again to Matt for securing those monies, which will prove that we can fix this. So don't put all the blame in one basket. It's generated from all over.
And I think.
In the United States, glyphosate, which is the main. In the United States, glyphosate, which is the main pesticide problem that we have, 60% of it is from residential use, and residential use uses 40 times the amount that is prescribed by the companies right on the bottle. So I was wondering, are we doing anything to do that? Because now we have 30% and 45% vinegar, which kills weeds. So can we do something about an interface with the community to let them know that? Because I tell people about that all the time, every time, yesterday, in fact, when I see them reaching for the Roundup or whatever it is. And they go, really? I can do it and they're so excited. But people don't know about it. So can we somehow do some kind of communication with the city and have that in the general plan, included in the general plan? Because that would make a lot of difference if we're not poisoning it in the first place and then have to clean it up, because that stuff lasts for decades, actually.
And
from European studies.
And from a Clean Water Act perspective, anything that runs off into the gutters or lakes or any of that stuff that's not rainwater or snow melt is considered a pollutant. So it would merit consideration. Because of the impairments that we have established by the EPA on our creeks and lakes, that forces my hand to focus on certain components within the watershed. But that does not mean that things such as pesticides or even fertilizer use in the residential setting don't bear some scrutiny as well. And just on the swimmable lakes point, I think we've got a great case study right in our neighborhood. I don't know if anybody was out at Lynx Lake this summer, but every weekend you went there, that place was slammed. And it was people coming up to go swimming. And they only do it, they can't do it here, but they know they can do it there. It's a different setting. They've got an entire surrounded by forest, not by an urban area. But from an ecotourism and revenue perspective, those people would be paying entry fees. They would be getting gas locally. They would be eating, visiting the local establishments. So this is just one of many places that ecotourism really shines in our community and has a great untapped potential at this point in time. These are just the last couple elements, and as I mentioned in the intro, I'm not tapping into these things, even though the city has worked on some of these. They will be discussed at a later date. I got some great feedback from community development, the chief building official, regarding stuff they've done on dark sky. So some of that is in place, regional cooperation. And so knowing that those are going to be tackled by other people at a later date, the question I bring really to you folks is, and the community at large, is what are we missing in it? The revised statutes provide pretty far latitude as they identify natural resources, water quality. And so some of the things that that I think about. I come from more of a watershed restoration background. Are we looking at things like the threatened and endangered species that we find in our open space settings and working in a way that does not hurt their presence here, but turns it into a benefit, again, from like an ecotourism perspective? Are there watershed scale collaborations with the county or the Forest Service that we could look at to be a little bit more strategic on how we tackle some of these joint issues of water quality, whether it's up in Mountain Club or at the forest just, towards White Spar? Are invasive species a potential issue for us as it relates to, the ecosystem services that native vegetation would provide for us? So these are all things for us collectively to consider as we move forward that may merit some consideration.
The E in T&E is endangered species, and the T stands for what?
T for threatened, E for endangered, as identified by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service.
And do we have any threatened and endangered species?
Ellen Basher and Rec Service has just put some in over at the Community Nature Center. We got some Gila top minnow, an endangered fish out of southern Arizona. That was it was a partnership effort, and they utilized a safe harbor agreement in that setting. And so when you're dealing with threatened and endangered species, there are ways to protect the landowner from liability associated with doing things that could potentially hurt those threatened or endangered species. And so in our case, we signed a safe harbor agreement with Arizona Game and Fish to take those on kind of as an experimental population and educational outreach.
You mentioned fish. Is there anything besides fish?
Yes. Yeah, they're birds.
Birds?
Yeah. We've got yellow-billed cuckoo, southwest willow flycatcher. Those are present. There Migratory Bird Act and other things that would also come into play in terms of how we manage our public lands within the city of Prescott.
What would be an example of the invasive species?
So, as Councilman Moore noted, Siberian elms are omnipresent. Some would even consider them naturalized. I would tend to look at things like salt cedar. Tamarisk is another name for it. Tree of heaven. Those are ones that have the potential to significantly alter, in the case of salt cedar, it can significantly alter the soil chemistry. And so not only is it going to displace breeding birds, but it could also prevent other native plants from growing within its kind of area. And so the non-native trees have architecture to their structure that native birds are not accustomed to, so they're not as readily able to build nests in some of them. So if you look at tree of heaven versus like soap tree willow or Arizona walnut, you're gonna find 10 nesting birds to one that you would find in any tree of heaven.
Councilman Moore, you have something to say?
Well, this is near and dear to my heart. Oops, I hit that by accident. I don't know. Okay. There are a lot of invasive species, and there are a lot of threatened and endangered species. And examples of invasive species can be birds as well. For example, we have things like Eurasian collared doves, European starlings. The name alone indicates this is not a species native to North America. House sparrows, rock doves, and as he mentioned with trees, the same with wildlife. If you had a given acre, like an acre of undisturbed natural habitat, you could ask the question, how many species of birds or how many numbers of birds could 1 acre of natural habitat support? And maybe it's 20 birds, depending on the habitat, if it's, pinyon juniper versus ponderosa pine. But if you introduce, let's say, 6 Eurasian collared doves into that acre of property, now that means there's 6 native species have been forced out because a certain area can only support so many species of birds. There's only so much food or prey base, depending on what it is, And so that's just something that affects all of us. And he's already mentioned tree of heaven and tamarisk and Siberian elm. These trees tend to force out native trees that would occur here naturally. And there's been a lot of really good studies that plants that have developed in this ecosystem have evolved over millennia in a co-relationship with the animals that live here, whether it's rabbits or lizards or snakes or birds, insects especially. And we find that when you plant non-native trees and shrubs, that they don't act as a host for the insects that would occur in native trees and shrubs. So they can't support the birds that would naturally occur there because the food isn't there. So it has this huge ripple effect anytime you plant non-native trees and shrubs in an area. And I just want to add to what Tana said, because just yesterday we had a city council meeting and I spoke to this topic. One of the items on the consent agenda item was an approval of a contract with Vicente Landscaping to provide landscaping services for the city of Prescott, and I voted against it. I was the only council member that voted against it yesterday. It's not because it was Vicente Landscaping. That's not the issue. The issue, and I would like to see this in the general plan, is that as a city, I think we should be the model and the example for how we handle the use of pesticides and herbicides. How often do you see city crews with pickup trucks out spraying weeds on medians and near sidewalks? And we're applying poisons into our environment. And you could go to Lowe's or Home Depot or True Value or Walmart, and they have whole aisles dedicated to poisonous liquids that you can apply in your yard. And homeowners are buying this and they're going home and they're applying it in their yards, and it's getting into our stream system, which is then getting into our lakes, and it has this huge ripple effect. And I'm not saying we outlaw these things, but I think as a city, we should set the example on how we're using herbicides and pesticides, and maybe the citizens will follow suit. If we're not doing it, we can't expect the citizens to do it. So I just want to share my personal feelings on that topic.
For those of you who don't know, glyphosate, which is the main pesticide that's used, and it's like 98% of what we use in the U.S. Under different subnames. It causes a bunch of different cancers. It causes autism and Asperger's. That's syndrome spectrum. It causes ADHD. It's been linked to Alzheimer's and the progressive increase of Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia it's a parallel line as the use of it has shot up in residential areas and in agricultural areas for the workers. So, and that's what we know. That's what the research, because I'm a research person, that's what the research shows so far. And there's a lot of links by association that have not yet been proved, but Monsanto, DuPont, Dow are the biggest conglomerates besides big pharmacy in the world. So it's kind of hard to fight them. So if we do it on the city level, which other cities have done, so there are best practices, and if you want, I can research that and then I'll send it to Rob or to Gary, that information for you. Okay.
And speaking to that landscape point, there are some good examples out there of people thinking a little more creatively on how to crack that nut. The city of Tucson has an extensive goal of increasing their green stormwater infrastructure, but the standard methods of landscape maintenance are a kind of a blow and go mentality where everything looks like a lollipop and we don't retain a lot of some of the really beneficial parts of a plant or whatnot. So what they've done is actually created a maintenance program in their Storm to Shade program. And what they do is they train landscape companies on how to landscape appropriately so that they're not weed whacking native plants and beneficial plants, and so that we're minimizing any use of herbicides. And so there are some really cool examples out there that I think we all could learn from.
Well, thanks to Councilman Moore, when we talk about non-native species, and I may be guilty of this because my wife wanted fruit trees, but when I went around door to door, I was under the impression that any new development had to have native species. But the residents then plant non-native trees in their backyard, I didn't realize the situation with the wildlife, but they eat a lot more water than native species do. So there's something to be said about being a little more attuned to what people plant in their backyards.
And I could go on and on, but I won't. That's all I have for you all at this point in time, given the kind of narrowed profile on this environmental element. But should you have any other questions, I'd be happy to take them.
This is Andre Carmen. I have a general question. How does the 2015 general plan and the components that relate to your job, how does that affect you on a daily basis?
So I started working for the city in 2016 and didn't learn about this general plan until I was asked to review it a couple of months ago.
It sounds like no.
So the reality of my position is the city was facing 15 impaired water bodies and was out of compliance with the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality. My marching orders were pretty well defined at that point in time to build our MS4 program, bring us into compliance, and fundamentally improve our water quality. The elements that were listed before you today never crossed my desk.
Have you heard within your department whether the leaders of your department find the general plan too rigid or not rigid enough or inflexible?
Quite frankly, I haven't heard it referenced in discussion.
The general plan at all? Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And just on that note, that's why we created the work group where we have the city employees that actually would implement it are actually working on it, which is kind of a first time. Usually everybody's been too busy, but we actually got from the very beginning the buy-in from the other departments of how important this is. A city plan. It's not our document, and it's up to them to help us implement it. So we want goals and strategies that make sure that we are addressing the issues we have in the city of Prescott, not just the feel-good things that usually you see in a general plan. Most general plans are pretty standard documents because consultants are writing them, and they keep using the same plans over and over. This time we are really digging into it, and we have the city staff that's really helping us to make sure that we're addressing the issues and looking at the newer types of technologies out there to address these issues that we have.
And if I may follow up, I think the place I would have been most likely to encounter it, other than direct reference, would have been through the strategic plans. And there's not a lot of alignment between the annual strategic plans and what you find in the general plans. I've got another presentation I'm working on currently, and I'm supposed to talk about how I align my goals and mission for me and the one other person that does this stuff with a strategic plan that largely ignores environmental issues. And so even though it's a required element of here, that's another place that we don't see it manifested. So I don't know that there's any singular point at which this didn't get relayed. I think it potentially had multiple opportunities and never quite raised itself to those considerations.
Yeah. Quick question. Will you be able to come back or supply us information from the grant and your actions in the...
Yeah, so the grant's just about to kick off, and we will be having outreach with stakeholders, bringing community members in, regional partners like Yavapai County, the Quad City Climate Collaborative. We'll reach out to Prescott Valley as well. And so we'll be doing that to help create a more regional evaluation of what these features look like and how we can prioritize them in our community. And we have additional outreach as part of this grant, so we'll probably be annoying you with it. So you'll hear back from us for sure.
Councilman Moore, did you have another comment?
Question.
I appreciate Andre's question, and I appreciate Matt's honesty as far as that it hadn't been referenced in his employment since 2016. And I guess as a council member, and I'm a liaison to this body, I've been assigned by the mayor to be a council representative to, we have an annual meeting where we kind of develop a strategic plan as a mayor and council. And I guess my concern is we need our elected officials to be reading this document, because we see a lot of turnover in elected officials every 2 years. We have an election where at a minimum 3 council seats are available every 2 years. And we're talking about a plan that's going to be in place until 2035. And if we're developing the strategic plan as council members, but we're not looking at the general plan, there's a real disconnect. So I don't know what the process is, because maybe this is more of a legal question, for how do we get elected officials to read the general plan when they get elected, so that they incorporate elements of the the general plan into the strategic plan. So I'm just raising this question because this has been really telling to me, and it's sad, and it's abysmal.
I'll take a shot at that one.
Okay.
We have, on the Planning Commission, we have a number of examples of where 11 smart people put together the 2015 general plan. And as I went to a community group today, and as I go to all community groups, I say, the charter amendments are coming up. Please read them, because when you vote on them, then that becomes law. When you vote on the general plan, that triggers the staff, and that triggers developers that, oh, okay, so I can build something here, I can build something there. And then the community comes out afterwards and says, oh, no, we don't want you to build there. Well, read the plan so you know what you're voting for. Now, a good example of that was 2 years after the last general plan, we had the council vote on an issue up at the airport, which has been contentious ever since. Now, I believe staff at every time when it comes, at least before the Planning Commission, says they make reference to the general plan if it's there. So there is a reference to it, but to your point, not only city council, but residents themselves should be attuned to the general plan.
Ralph Hess. Andre's question is quite revealing, and I'm surprised by the response. And I think it should be a standard question for every one of these presenters, because we're, as a committee, working on a general plan, and if staff is unaware of the general plan, and if council is unaware of the general plan, then we have to consider whether our time is well spent. So that's my comment.
I have one quick question. Just looking at one specific area, this is Jim McCarver, cleaning up the lakes. Realistically, with the stuff that's in place now, do you think in the next 10 years, by 2035, the lakes will be swimmable?
I think that's a very reasonable goal, and I'd rather see it in there than not, quite frankly. So there are steps in place. There's some critical components and treatments that are on the horizon, not on a different planet, thankfully. And so we're able to see some of those potentially go in this winter, spring, and then some additional ones in the spring. Some of them are complicated by external regulatory forces. When you deal with the treatment of a lake, you're also, whether or not you realize it, are dealing with FEMA, Arizona Department of Water Resources, Army Corps of Engineers, Arizona Department of Environmental Quality, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service potentially. So when we go in some of these actions and treatments, when we go to look to do it, it becomes somewhat of a round robin. And so we have to propose something, and once we get buy off here, we take it here. If that doesn't fly, then we go back to step one. And it's an iterative process until we get to that place. But some of these things are a little bit more plug and play, and we're getting closer. And so I think in the short term, not the 10-year horizon, but the 2-year horizon, we should see some real improvements at Watson Lake in particular, but they should also be exported to all of our lakes.
Well, I hope so. I used to spend a lot of time in a place called Kunming, China. It's in the south. It's in the mountains in southwest China, and they have a huge lake there, much bigger than anything we have here. And I'd say 2/3 of it is covered with algae.
It's a struggle to get to talk in public anymore. One of the answers to the question about implementation of the plan and knowledge among all of the staff members and council about what's in the plan, we've talked about several times with you before, and that is a follow-on implementation plan that goes with the general plan, gets adopted by council at the same time, has a reporting requirement, goes to the city council every year so that they're reminded that there are implementation items and there are deadlines and timeframes involved in it. We talked extensively about it in 2015. The council said they were going to follow up with it. There wasn't one. It needs to go with the plan rather than as a follow-on document. If it's a follow-on, the same thing could happen again. It happened last time. The plan becomes obscure. The public doesn't know about it. But if we have an implementation strategy and a reporting requirement on that implementation strategy, it's a constant reminder. And I think that's probably the best approach to make sure that we remember it.
I want to echo that and respond to Jim. Nothing to me in the 17 years I've been here, 44 years in community economic development, is more important than this committee in my vision. And going to council and saying, this is what the public wants. And to go back to what you said about hope for the lakes, I was chairman of the Lake Subcommittee when Marlon Kirkendall was the mayor. We did, I forget, 4 presentations to the public. They're recorded, they're documented. We had the Army Corps engineer on our side. They wanted to give us up to $100,000 for more study. They promised up to $5 million to fix those lakes. One of the problems with the lakes is siltation. We just tested it recently. They're 1/3 silted, 2/3 capacity. Those things can be mediated. Former council said, well, we don't want to do that right now. Let's postpone that and hire consultants for $500,000. That's what the history is, because the general plan committee had no teeth. We need to have teeth.
George, I have a question. Rather than having a separate implementation plan, can it be an element we choose to include in the plan?
That's actually what I meant. It
Okay.
needs to be part of the plan, go with the plan, rather than as a separate document, because it'll get separated and it may not happen.
That was the goal.
Yeah.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Matt.
Next item on the agenda.
The next item is a discussion about major plan amendments. Member Hess asked us to put this on the agenda again to discuss. There we are. So major plan amendments are in state statutes and as part of the plan. So, I know, so it's not working. It's on. It's frozen. Oh, there you go. Okay. I did. Smoke's affecting me today. Oh, sorry. So most of the time when we see projects come in, like most rezoning requests, that we look at our land use map. So usually when we look at major plan amendments, we wait till we're looking at the land use unit and what's the land use map. State statutes describes the process to doing a major map amendment process. It's basically the same process we go through as adopting the general plan, except it doesn't go to the voters. So There was a change in state statutes last year in regards to major plan amendments, which us as planners that have been with it for a while and growing smarter legislature, we thought was kind of a disservice. But basically, applicants will have to do a pre-application meeting, which we require for any projects. Applications will be accepted for processing within the required 10-month time frame. So it used to be that major plan amendments can only be heard once a year. The idea was that you're going to hear all the big projects all at once. So you had every jurisdiction would have this is when you'd have to apply. It's usually June, July, to start the process, and they'd all be heard at the end of the year. Last year they changed it. They could be heard any time of year, and they aren't all heard at the same time. That was kind of a disservice the legislature did, because there were some jurisdictions in the valley that this was slowing down projects.
This is what?
They were slowing down projects because they can only be heard once a year. So as part of that, we do have a process where you have to send it out to all the surrounding jurisdictions and a lot of other groups, which we have to do with our general plan too. We have a 60-day comment period to allow for anybody to comment on the proposal request. They go to 2 Planning and Zoning Commission public hearings and then go to City Council for consideration within 12 months of them applying. State law requires 2/3 majority vote by City Council to approve any major map amendment. So when in 2002, prior to the general plan being adopted, they had to create the process for, or what triggers a major plan amendment, which this is chapter 13 in your general plan. So they created this for the major plan amendment. So one, from the land use map, we have triggers that will require it. So this is kind of it somehow.
So who created that?
So it's created by staff and adopted by a city council in 2002.
So it's in the general plan.
Yes, by resolution.
It's in the general plan, but it wasn't voted on by the people in 2015. It was created by staff and council after.
But it's part of the general plan, so it's older. So the major plan amendment, the resolution was adopted by council to create what's going to trigger a major plan amendment. And then that was part of the general plan when it was adopted in 2005 and then in 2015.
So the citizens did vote on this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
It's in the existing general plan, but it is also by resolution. So if any, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
The requirement to create a major plan amendment process was built into state law. It required anyone to do a separate amendment or a separate resolution, to create the criteria locally of what triggers it. So every municipality can be different as to what the trigger levels are. The city adopted in 2002 the resolution that set that, as we were in the process of working on the general plan at the time. And then it became part of that general plan and then followed on to the others. But the original creation occurred prior to the adoption.
So does both the resolution and the general plan have to be changed if this is modified?
Probably yes.
Okay.
So this is something it's pretty standard of what triggers a major plan amendment. This is usually how we look at it. So if the project is 40 acres or more in size, and there are 400 or more homes within a quarter mile, then it's major plan amendment. And there's triggers of what it is. Usually if we're changing from residential to a different type of use that's labeled in the land use map, that's what will trigger it when we start looking at these things. If it's a small rezoning and it's compatible with the land use map, it doesn't trigger any amendments. If they don't comply with the land use map, they can be considered minor and processed with these rezoning.
I have another question about the standards. So let's just take the 40 acres because that's simple. If the actual buildable area is less than 40 acres, does that trigger a major plan amendment if the entire area is 40 acres or more? So let's say there's rocks or there's retention basins required, things where you're not going to build.
We look at the whole project area that's being requested to be rezoned.
Okay. So that means the rodeo grounds would be a major plan amendment.
If it's not in compliance with the land use map, possibly. So, then the general plan text amendments that change existing guiding principles. In talking with George, there have been no major plan amendments done in the city of Prescott. They are kind of rare up in the northern region. So then I have the different categories that are on our land use map. So if they're changing it from residential to a commercial and so forth, then it could trigger it based on those categories. So, and
Tammy?
And so, yeah, it's only triggered if they're asking for a rezoning. If they're not asking for anything and they're developing under existing zoning, it doesn't trigger any major amendments.
Tammy, I have a question. The first row in this,
back one slide.
yeah, go back a slide, please. There we go. It has to meet both 40 acres in size and 400 or more homes in a quarter mile, in a 1 square quarter mile, right? Okay, I just did the math. That works out to a home every 1/10 of an acre. That's pretty high density. So it would have to be real high density to trigger this. Okay, all right.
So basically, and it's an amendment to an area plan or neighborhood plan, which plan has not been formally incorporated in the general plan, shall not trigger amendments. And then inclusion of additional territory into a city. So when we annex a piece of property, we initially rezone it to match what the similar zoning from the county to what our zoning is. That would not trigger a amendment. It's if they're asking for a further rezoning beyond that, it may trigger a amendment. And then but this is our land use map that we currently have that we look at when projects come forward. So I'll hand it over to Member Hess to discuss why.
Thank you, Ralph Hess. Yeah, I've been advocating that we discuss this early on because two things. One, as you pointed out, the criteria establishing a major plan amendment is locally determined. So it's not by statute. It's something that you've just commented and staff drew this up. And then was approved by council. And the other point is there's never been a major plan amendment in the city of Prescott, which suggests to me is this is too narrow. And a second point is, correct me if I'm wrong, but you've told us on a number of occasions that the only really enforceable part of the general plan is the zoning map.
Land use map.
Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is my suggestion. For the 2025 plan, I would suggest that we amend the criteria for a major amendment. And if you go back to what the current section 13.0 states, I can, not this, this. Yeah. What I would suggest is that one, you're not going to need that whole section B anyway in my proposals, so we don't need it. And so you're not going to need the paragraph A either. All we would need is subparagraph 1 and subparagraph 2. And since the zoning map is the only real enforceable provision or part of this general plan, I would suggest that paragraph number 1 read any change of the land use map, period. So that if there's a change to the land use map, that'll constitute a major plan amendment. And so you're not going to need any of the rest of paragraph 1. And then for paragraph 2, put a period, well, actually, you only need the first sentence. My recommendation would be just the first sentence, because the second sentence starts talking about what is not a major plan amendment, and so I don't think you even need it. Because in the first sentence, you've established what is going to be a major plan amendment. And that's going to be anything that changes the existing guiding principles and/or goals or strategies. And that way you have a real simple, clean major amendment provision.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
Couple of questions relating to that. If you only have a major plan amendment definition that, if you only have a definition that makes every map change a major amendment, it will create a lot of major amendments. There will be a constant flow of major amendments that come through. That can be workload for council, and it can be workload for the planning commission. Every time someone with a single family lot who's at the edge of a boundary of two zoning districts that wants to change from one district to another will create a general plan amendment, a major amendment to the general plan. Because in most cases, the land use that's underlying on the general plan map and the zoning are more or less in conformance, mostly. So that's something to keep in mind. It can create a lot of these things. Not having one triggered at all may reflect the fact that this is too narrow or too broad. I'm not sure which to call it. But triggering one every time you amend the map might have the opposite effect, or may have a worse effect. It could create a situation where no changes to zoning can occur. Something to keep in mind.
I can live with that.
One of the things I've heard, and I've read a lot from people's comments, is when someone objects to a change in or around their neighborhood, it's thrown out at them, and I'll use the airport as an example. Well, you should have known when you bought the property. Well, someone like me actually goes and looks at the zoning because I know I need to look at it. And I know other people do too. If I can't rely on what the zoning is, and there can't be community discussion about a change in the zoning, this whole document is worthless.
One thing to keep in mind separately, and I'm sure you're well aware of it, the general plan land use map and the major map amendment process and zoning changes are parallel but separate. So you can change zoning often if it stays within the category of the general plan land use. So the zoning thing can occur. You could still have a situation where you should have known, so to speak, when a zoning change occurs, without necessarily triggering the major amendment process.
So let me make sure I understand what you're saying. If something is zoned multifamily and it changes to SPC or commercial or business oriented, which is a completely different category, that's a pretty big underlying change. If you go from residential to something else, that would be a big underlying change. Because that seems to be where a lot of the objection comes from, is when something is zoned some type of residential and then it changes to industrial, business oriented, whatever.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Ralph Hess again. And another reason I'm making this suggestion is that we've discussed a number of times that committee members and people outside this committee have repeatedly heard concerns that the general plan is circumvented by council and that it lacks enforceability, and that they're repeatedly told it's just a guideline and we're not going to follow the guide. So this, to me, would be one means of making it a stronger document, so that if someone comes before council and wants to change or have something that's outside the purview of the general plan, they actually are going to have to, if it changes the zoning land use map, or if it changes the guidelines, it's a major amendment. You know, and I go back to the concept that you've never had a general plan amendment, which to me indicates there's a problem with this current criteria.
Terry Sapio, I'm kind of listening to the arguments back and forth, and I kind of agree with George. First of all, when we're working this general plan, we're trying to look 10 years into the future. If we could look accurately 10 years into the future, we would have all bought Microsoft when it was really cheap. We would have all bought Amazon when it was really cheap. We'd all be billionaires right now. So we're trying to predict the future when that's inherently impossible to do. So by making the major plan amendments more likely to be triggered, in other words, making it more restrictive, we're trying to say we're so good at predicting the future that we're going to make it very, very difficult to change anything without a major plan amendment. Furthermore, if Joe Young were here right now, he would probably tell us there's a legal issue with it because this was a resolution passed by the City Council on June 25th of 2002. So it's essentially city ordinance, right?
No, it's a resolution.
A resolution. It's not binding?
It doesn't carry the same weight in law.
Okay.
No. It's a statement of policy typically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I would point out the one point that in regard to that resolution, because we have included the definition of major plan amendment in both the 2003 plan and the more recent 2015 plan, you can't just change it. You'll change it when you adopt a new plan. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not going to happen out of sequence.
Yeah. The thing is, my concern is we don't want to really tie the hands of future city councils. I mean, they have to have some flexibility. And I think that's why when I looked at this density, I thought, boy, you need to have, for 40 acres, a density of one housing unit per 1/10 of an acre. Those are really tiny, tiny lots. But I think it was intentionally made that way so that it takes something really significant to trigger a major plan amendment, and that does allow for some flexibility for future city councils.
Yeah, Ralph Hess, the flexibility is built into the process that the city would have to go through in order to pass a major amendment. So that's the flexibility. It's just that they're not going to be able to continually make major plan amendments under the guise of just regular amendments.
Okay, actually, I disagree with that because the process to make a major plan amendment requires a supermajority vote of the council. That means that only 2 members out of 7 members of the council can kill a major amendment. And that is a threshold that is almost impossible to overcome because you can very easily get 2 city council members to vote against something and kill it. For example, Stringfield Ranch is a perfect example. Only took 2 no votes to kill that annexation into the city. And as a result, what did we get? We get more units, housing units at a greater density than what we would have had if it had been annexed into the city. So basically, by making this more restrictive, you are tying the hands of future city councils because it only takes 2 no votes to kill it.
Ralph Hess, Stringfield was an anomaly, actually. If you look, most of the council votes have been unanimous, and they've often had 6-1 votes. As a matter of fact, Councilman Moore just mentioned a vote in which he was the sole dissenter in a vote before council. And historically, the council has not had any difficulty in reaching a supermajority vote.
Can I make one clarification to one clarification?
Have you finished?
Go ahead.
Okay, you can talk, and then Deb will talk, and then I'll talk.
Okay, it was just in regard to
I have a question too.
The concern about bypassing the process relating to implementation of the general plan in general, this criteria has to be met. So a council could not simply ignore the 40 acres, 400 units or more major amendment process. We haven't had any because we haven't had a project that triggered these criteria. So just to be clear, it wasn't because we bypassed it, it's because nothing has triggered these criteria.
No, Ralph Hess. I wasn't referring to
Okay.
a majority vote or a supermajority vote regarding a major amendment. I'm just saying on other matters where the council has been required to provide meet a supermajority, it's unusual historically for them not to have that supermajority from my observation.
Let me just ask one quick
Jim,
question.
yeah, you wanted to.
These parameters, are they pretty standard nationally? Do cities have different parameters for similar developments like this?
So a lot of them have been updated recently with their updating their general plans. So Plan Tucson, they had 3 triggers. The site of the development proposal is not covered by an adopted specific plan. The future growth scenario map building blocks, so their land use map, designation for the site as depicted on the future growth scenario, and the proposed development site consists of 65 or more acres. So what we saw kind of, I know for counties in the mid-2000s, we had a lot of large solar projects or alternative energy projects wanting to come in. So a lot of I know the counties, they changed their general plans to include bigger areas to accommodate for these alternative energy projects to come in to not trigger it because of the timeframes being only heard once a year. So, but as we're seeing them now, as the cities are coming in, some of them are lowering those thresholds. So Tucson was just 65 or more acres. Gilbert, in their 2020 plan, so major dependents are residential amendments, any land use map, residential density classification increase of 160 acres or more, any change from a residential land use map classification to a non-residential of 40 acres or more. 40's been our pretty typical here. So then we have Cottonwood with their 2025 plan. And I was looking for ones that have done more recent plans in the area. Cottonwood, 40 acres. On number 3, any change in a planned development land use classification of 40 or more. All those are 40 or more acres, mostly. Prescott Valley, 2035 plans. Well, this is Prescott Valley growing like crazy. So a change from residential land use to non-residential, 100 acres or more, except for open space and public, quasi-public spaces. Proposal of 100 or more acres that increases the maximum number of allowed residential units by more than 250 units. So they're allowing for the larger developments coming in to come in without triggering it. I think that was the last one I had. Yeah, that was the last one I found recently.
One more point of clarification. The quarter mile, the density on that home, are there this many homes within a quarter mile? Is that a quarter mile outside the 400 acres?
Yeah, so we go from the property boundary out.
Out a quarter mile. So that's not as dense as it would seem at first blush, I don't think. You're making the area larger.
Deb, you had a comment?
Yeah, rather than get into a back and forth here, I think the reason Ralph is presenting this and the reason I think we need to look at the criteria is we keep hearing from people that the general plan means nothing. I heard from people who attended the open house that, yeah, I'm here, but it's not going to do any good. I think this community, from what I've seen in 6 years, wants a say in what happens. And I think that's always been the case here. And unfortunately, if you look at it from the other way, if it's something the community wants, they're going to come out, they're going to support it. The 2/3 vote's going to happen. It's not going to be a big deal. But it also gives the council, I think, some protection in not getting ousted in the next election because they voted for Stringfield Ranch, which was an interesting deal. If the water company hadn't been formed, that wouldn't have happened.
I want to get to item F on the agenda, and before we do, I make a closing comment on the current topic. You remember after the first contentious AVO meeting, I opened the second meeting, and I said I'm sad to report that Washington, D.C. politics has come to everybody's hometown. This is kind of this, for a different reason, but it's kind of Washington, D.C. politics. Ever since we started, we know that the general plan is not legally binding, but Councilman Moore said it today, and we've heard it, and Ralph has made a number of attempts to get it into the city charter. I think this topic deserves more discussion, and I'd like to suggest that we put it on the agenda for the next meeting. And maybe we have a subcommittee of staff, Ralph, anyone else that wants to volunteer without meeting or the quota. Because I go back to what I originally said many times. I have a hard time asking 11 smart people to spend 3 years to put this together and then go to the voters and the voters approve it, and then when it's not convenient, they just summarily dismiss it. Okay, I know it's not legally binding, but I think Ralph and Deb and Jim McCarver have Gary. They've got some genesis of how you can make this a little more important. Terry's right. You can't always project 10 years into the future. But I've had too many examples on the Planning Commission where it was in the 2015 general plan and we couldn't get something passed. So I'd like to suggest we put this on the next meeting and maybe in the meantime get together in a subcommittee that discuss this in more detail.
Ralph Hess, if you're going to put it on a future agenda, could we please put it on the November agenda, because I'm not going to be here for the October meeting.
That works for me. Mm-hmm. Okay, now I wanted to get to F.
Can I interrupt real quick here?
You already did.
I just interrupt. Two things that are really important to make this successful. One is already happening. Thank you for bringing in representatives from committee, because the last general plan we didn't do that. We went by shoestrings. But more importantly, and you don't know this, but two of us met with Matt Killeen before with Eric Moore. I think it's really important. You just talked about having a committee, another committee. I think that everyone here should follow their passion or get involved with those people who are doing presenting so that we're better educated. If we're not educated to the max, then we're not presenting the best for the future of the general plan.
Okay. Now, I wanted to move to F because we had a great open house. We had over 50% more than we ever had before. I've received a number of emails of things that you could do better, and granted, you can always do better. But the thing I really liked about it was the turnout and the resident participation. Gary made some comments that people were confused, and I'm okay with that. Now, what I learned in going to the tables, and I'll use Terry's table as an example, there were a plethora, not of piñatas, but a plethora of green dots for the airport. There were 3 red dots for the airport. And the reason they were red dots is because one wanted a flight to Dallas, and one wanted a flight to Las Vegas, and one wanted a flight to the Bay Area. So that's all green plus 3 more, but that showed up red. And each of you that had a table are better able to interpret what went down. So what I talked to a couple committee members, and I've talked to city staff about getting together with Tammy so she can go through your table with the data that you see, the green dots and the red dots and the Post-it notes, but you're better able to interpret it, because the story I got from Terry was he was better able to interpret what went down at that table with regards to police, with regards to fire, especially with regards to the airport, because the airport's one of the contentious issues right now. And what I'm going to ask, and Tammy has a sign-up sheet, is that each of you from your table get with Tammy and go through what she has now so that we can finalize the results.
What if you were a floater and you didn't have a table?
That was me. I didn't have a
I
table.
didn't have one either.
Well, if you,
But I took pictures of the tables I went to.
We want your opinions and we want
Yeah.
your interpretations anyway, whether you were assigned or just wandering between.
because, in some respects, it might have been confusing to people, and the best people able to cut through some of the confusion is the person that owned the table. So,
Well, I would like-
if you're a rover, you can still sign up for your input. Now, Jim, in your case, you weren't.
Or however long.
Jim, you were with the Historic Preservation Society, right?
Yep.
Okay.
I was at that table.
And I don't have anything on hers, so that's Kaylee's separate. But if you know something about one of the other tables or comments that you want to make on the other tables, that'd be fine.
Some general comments too.
Okay, perfect.
to send these to Tammy?
So
You're going to get together with Tammy.
we could do it too. Yeah, I have some times the next couple of weeks. I have 2 days dedicated for general plan days. That's my goal on 2 days. So those are the kind of live with that. I have them all done. I have them in a spreadsheet, all the comments. I got them done Monday. So I will email that out to you all so you can see. So I have like the challenges and the opportunities that we had, and then whatever green and red dots, and then the public comments, all the sticky notes. I put them all, so some of them might not read very well, but that's what it said. I made sure to make sure that it read exactly what people put on the things.
For example, in the airport, it'll show 20 green and 3 red. Well, that's not really 3 red. They're only red because they want to go somewhere.
But yeah, all the Post-it notes
Post-it
are.
notes too.
So I did not touch them. I mean, I moved them a little bit so you can see a little bit, but I was very careful in keeping the dots with it. And I had pictures of everything before I even pulled them from the table. So we have extra documentation. All of them have a check mark that they were documented, and all the dots are numbered. So if you can see exactly how it went. So I will email all that to you guys tomorrow. Tomorrow morning, I have it converted and be able to email it out. Then you have a chance to go through it and make notes. And then if you sign up, and then we'll go through it and add it into the database.
See, here's what I have to comment on. I found a huge weakness that needs to be corrected. I have over 50 years involved in open space, and I was not consulted beforehand. What would my input be to this open? I came prepared to put all those Post-it notes that I wrote on the table, and I did, but they were overwhelmed by your comments. So
Yeah, you guys reviewed at 2 meetings.
You had 2 meetings where you had a shot at it.
No. You could have said, I want to talk with you individually. And I should have said it, but I did not know that you were going to, and you did an amazing job. I'm not taking that away from you. But some of us have expertise in the specific areas we wanted to represent. Rod and I were open space. And it's my fault as well, so I will take the blame of not saying to you beforehand, I need to sit with you and be on the same page with what you're going to, because you had comments that were totally confusing to myself and to people, and I had to go, okay, where is she coming from?
Wait, what do you mean? Sorry. Yeah, I'm confused. The questions that we had on the boards?
No, the statements you had on the table.
Right, the ones you guys all approved.
Pre-printed.
The ones you guys all approved. Yeah, yeah.
Like public support. I had people go crazy over that, or public, I can't remember.
I understand, but that's a learning process for all of us as a committee. You as a committee approved all of those boards and exactly what they were going to look like. So we need to make those better in the future, but that's us as a group, all of us as a team.
But for each
Tammy
table,
didn't invent them.
each table to have a representative to be sat down with and say, this is what we're going to do, and you need to understand what those mean. I think that would have been germane to that.
Okay.
Tammy, where's your office now?
We're still at the old City Hall.
Okay. What floor?
It's all one.
Oh, so just go back to the development services counter?
Yeah, just go up to get community development and just, I'll have it ready. If you put what you're wanting, I'll have it all ready in the back room for that.
We're there hopefully until they demolish it.
What was the official title of my table? Well, I had the police, and I had the airport, and I had the library, and the fire department. Was that infrastructure?
Public facilities and services.
Yeah, public facilities and services. Oh, okay.
The closest you can get, I can figure it out.
While I've got this microphone in my hand, I'll tell you what, I was shocked. People, we had the strengths and the weaknesses, and they're putting the green dots and the red dots. I learned some very interesting things, and I didn't want to give Jack too big of a head, but the people of Prescott love the fire department. They love the police department. They love the library. I mean, it's like, wow, I couldn't believe the support in the community for police, fire, and library. And then when it came to the airport, the thing that really shocked me was that people really think the airport is finally on a good track. They really enjoy the commercial services. And I think there were more than 3 red dots. I can't remember how many there were, but every time somebody put a red dot in the airport, I was curious. I said, well, what's the red dot for? Almost all of them were, we want more flights and we want more destinations. And not one was a red dot because airport noise. In fact, nobody complained about airport noise, which surprised me. And one person said, oh, the communications and the staffing in the airport is terrible. And I said, well, why is that? They said, well, I'm planning a vacation. I went to the airport and I wanted to talk to some airline people about what flights I should take and plan it. And there was nobody there. And there was only one person at the rental car counter, and he was asleep. And I said, well, that's because we only have 4 flights a day, so they're not going to staff the airport all day long for just 4 flights a day. And then one woman said, I love the airport because ever since we got commercial service to Prescott, my adult kids come and visit me much more often because they don't have to rent a car when they get to Phoenix and drive up to Prescott. They can just fly into Prescott. And
I have to do it after childcare issue. Email Tammy.
Yeah.
okay, so at any rate, what really surprised me was the support for what we have in Prescott from the general public. And if anything, any of the criticisms was, we like what you're doing, but we want more.
And I think was the open house perfect? No, but input like that from the owner of the table will help.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
We want the input because we want the next one to be better than this one.
Are you going to summarize all this input that you expressed down the road?
Yeah, we'll go over that at the next.
Great stories.
Yeah. And you'll get all that because we'll update them. We'll add all the comments. There's a section on the spreadsheet for additional comments, so you'll all get those.
If you like spreadsheets, you'll get a summary.
Tammy, So what you're going to send to us is what you saw and took pictures of and documented at the open house. And then when the various owners of the tables or floaters give you their interpretation.
That'll all be on there too.
You're going to incorporate that and send it back out again?
Yes, basically has what the comments were, number of red dots, number of green dots, number of red dots, and then additional comments or explanation. I have clarification, additional comments. So it'll all be on one spreadsheet for each one. So you'll see it.
Thank you.
Sure. So I'll get that out tomorrow. 'Cause like I said, I just finished that Monday. So, and
Any
then.
staff announcements?
So our next meeting's October 25th. We have a circulation presentation. Ian's going to come and talk about traffic and circulation, moving of people.
Remember the age bracket in Prescott circulation is traffic circulation. Oh.
Oh,
Sorry.
Probably get that by tomorrow.
and we're,
Is it 25th?
yes, October 25th. And we will also be bringing, hopefully, a couple of the elements that are done or updated to start bringing them forward to you to start reviewing and commenting on.
We wouldn't really be able to comment much on them if we're just receiving them at the meeting. Are you going to send it out to us ahead of time?
It'll be part of the agenda in the packet, yes.
Okay, thanks.
We're starting to get stuff
wait.
updated, so I'm starting to get those in from the people who are done.
Thank you.
This is Ralph Hess. I'd like to be excused from the October meeting,
Okay.
since I'm not going to be.
Okay. Nope, that's it.
Meeting adjourned.
4 or 5.